Welcome to The Explainer. So, if you've been glancing at your news feeds lately, you already know May 2026 has been, well, an absolute whirlwind. We're talking about a dense, relentless wall of headlines. But our goal here today is to cut right through all that noise. We're going to filter out the distractions and zero in on the real, macro-level storylines that are actively shaping our world right now. Okay, let's dive right into this. Look, it is incredibly easy to get completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of news alerts pinging our devices every single hour. May 2026 is truly shaping up to be a historic month. But you know what? You don't need to read every single article to understand the big picture. I'm going to give you a clear, synthesized breakdown of the events that actually matter. Here is our roadmap for today. First, geopolitics and the US-Iran peace talks. Second, global health and the Ebola outbreak. Third, domestic crises involving chemical disasters. And finally, U.S. politics and the economy. Section 1. Geopolitics, U.S.-Iran peace talks. Starting with the widest global lens, we are watching this incredibly complex paradox unfold between the U.S. and Iran. It's honestly like a giant puzzle. On one hand, we've got ongoing peace negotiations. President Trump is out there teasing a potential breakthrough, even proposing a 60-day truce. But at the exact same time, we're seeing a totally different reality play out on the ground with renewed military strikes. The U.S. is launching self-defense strikes, Iran is vowing to retaliate, and Israel is striking Hezbollah. High-level diplomacy and active kinetic conflict happening literally at the exact same time. When you look at the timeline, it's just this constant volley back and forth. Trump signals that a deal might be close, talking about reopening the Strait of Hormuz, but then, almost immediately, the U.S. launches strikes in Iran. Right after that, Iran claims they attacked a U.S. base, warning they'll push the war beyond the region if those attacks don't stop. So right now, the whole world is basically holding its collective breath, waiting for a definitive response on that 60-day ceasefire. The outcome is completely up in the air. Section 2. Global health, the Ebola outbreak. Now, while geopolitical tensions are absolutely dominating the front pages, there's a severe public health situation making waves globally. And what's really interesting here is how fast international health concerns translate into domestic action. The U.S. has immediately tightened up its travel restrictions. If you're a passenger arriving from a high-risk country, you're now being funneled directly through specific airports, namely Atlanta, Houston, and Washington, D.C., for enhanced health screenings. So the epicenter of this current outbreak is in Central Africa, specifically the Congo. And what's making the medical response incredibly difficult, honestly a logistical nightmare, is that 3 different Ebola treatment centers over there have actually been attacked. To help manage the crisis, the U.S. government is actively building a quarantine facility in neighboring Kenya. And back at home, well, this has sparked some intense debate among lawmakers. Senator Marco Rubio, for instance, has publicly argued that no more Ebola patients should be allowed into the United States. We're really seeing a massive, rapid mobilization of both medical resources and political boundaries. Section 3. Domestic crises, chemical disasters. Bringing our focus back to U.S. soil for a minute, local authorities on the West Coast are currently grappling with some major industrial disasters. 9. It's a highly tragic number. It represents the individuals who, right now, still remain unrecovered following a massive, deadly chemical tank implosion up in Washington state. Authorities are already calling this one of the deadliest industrial tragedies in the state's recent history. And rescue and recovery teams are still out there actively working the scene. Now contrast that situation in Washington with what just unfolded down in California. 50,000. That is the massive number of people who had to immediately evacuate their homes in Orange County because of a severe chemical leak in a holding tank. There was a very real, very imminent threat of a catastrophic blast. Luckily, officials reported that a crack in the tank actually ended up being a positive sign. It relieved the pressure, which allowed them to mitigate and resolve the blast threat without disaster. But imagine the sheer scale of disruption and fear for those 50,000 residents. Section 4. U.S. politics and the economy. Let's move on and see how this all builds. Because underneath these international and industrial crises, the machinery of American politics is moving at lightning speed. The domestic landscape is incredibly active and, as you'd expect, highly polarized. Down in Texas, we saw a major shift. Ken Paxton defeated incumbent Senator John Cornyn in the Republican primary runoff. So the crucial point there is he's now set up for a closely watched race against Democrat James Tallarico. Meanwhile, up in Washington, there's significant bipartisan friction over a newly proposed Department of Justice anti-weaponization fund. Lawmakers are demanding clarity, and notably, police officers from January 6th have actually sued to block it. Add in some heightened security concerns following a recent shooting incident near the White House, And well, you have an incredibly tense political environment. But you might be wondering, how does all of this actually connect to your everyday life? Well, as summer kicks off, consumers are feeling a very real economic pinch. Millions of Americans who hit the road for the Memorial Day weekend ran straight into a double threat. Severe storms causing massive travel delays and the highest gas prices we've seen since 2022. Between the pain at the pump and rising costs at the grocery store, all these macro-level events we just talked about, they're showing up directly in the wallets of everyday citizens. Which leaves us with one massive question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. How are these overlapping global and domestic pressures going to shape the rest of the year? We've got a geopolitical powder keg in the Middle East, an emerging health crisis in Africa, domestic industrial emergencies, and an American electorate feeling the economic squeeze right in the middle of a high-stakes political season. The signal's clear, even through all that noise. Keep paying attention, stay curious, and we'll be right here to structure and break it all down for you next time.